If you've been wanting an off-road capable EV, but you don't have Rivian money, the Subaru Solterra has been one of the best options since 2022. But the slow charging and the short range made it difficult to recommend to a lot of shoppers. But this is an all-new Solterra. Yep, after just 3 short years, Subaru sharpened their pencil and they gave their EV all new looks, more powerful electric motors front and rear, and over 300 horsepower, a bigger battery located under there, and importantly, significantly more range and 50% faster charging, in addition to, yep, the new NACS or J3400 charge connector. So, is this a recommendable EV now? Well, let's find out. Subaru is calling the 2026 Solterra a second generation of their EV, and I'm okay with that. You might want to split hairs and say it's a heavy refresh, but the motors are different, the inverters are different, the battery is different, there's some significant changes to the interior, the suspension, and even the body have received changes, as has the crash structure. So basically, an all-new Solterra, and it wears their new design language up front for their electric vehicles. The previous Solterra just sort of looked like a Subaru with the grille blanked out. This definitely has its own design theme going on here. We have LED turn signals up front with 6 individual DRLs inside, and this bar is illuminated white when the turn signal is not operating. The headlight, that's down here in this relatively slim module. It's still a divorced headlight, which is not my favorite, but I think this looks better than some, and they've actually tucked a headlight washer up top, as you'd expect in a Subaru. We have an illuminated Subaru logo there, 360-degree camera system all the way around, with the digital system that actually is going to calculate the image that you're passing over, so you can actually see what you've run over in your Solterra. Coming around to the side, of course, they had to reinvent the wheels, so we get new wheel designs. This particular model is basically the top-end trim, so we have 235/50 R20s for that particular wheel. You'll notice that we do have the body-colored fender flares here that I haven't been the biggest fan of in the past, but you can now avoid them for 2026. If you get white or black, or I believe it's a gray color, you can actually skip that and they will be body color painted. That, I think, is definitely a visual improvement. Although on this particular paint job, it's actually grown on me a little bit. They aren't quite as chunky as in the BZ4X from Toyota, which this is closely related to. And I think the design is just a little bit more my preference. Back here we have a spoiler on top of this raked glass in the rear. That's one disadvantage to this design, is that it doesn't have a sharp cut in the back to give you even more cargo practicality. They did have to bow to aerodynamics, and that's part of why they were able to get a 26% improvement in range. The taillight modules, those have also received a subtle retweak. Full LEDs, of course, here with LED turn signals on the outboard side, LED backup lights there as well. And the bottom bumper, this is not shiny black plastic like the side fender flares are. This is actually a matte plastic insert, which is going to be a little bit easier to keep good looking over time. Now let's dive under the hood, because that is where we see some even more significant changes. If we pop open the hood, which has a prop rod over here on this side and opens nice and wide, we find probably the biggest changes, which is an all-new electrical architecture, really. New motors, new inverters, new chargers, new control systems, etc. Efficiency and extra power was the focus for 2026. If you get most of the models, you're going to find new twin electric motors, front and rear, producing 117 horsepower each for 233 horsepower total. If you get the XT trim, then we get even more power, 338 horsepower total. But in an interesting twist, they don't put the bigger motor in the back. The motor up front is a 224 horsepower motor. In the back, it uses the same 117 horsepower motor as the regular trim. So it is a little bit front power biased, which is different than some of the competition, which has the bigger motor in the back. We don't know exactly why Subaru did that, but it most likely has to do with the fact that there's more room for that motor up front. Now, the motors themselves are not just more powerful, they're smaller, lighter, and more efficient than before. And that's how range has gone up by 26%, even though the battery at 74.7 kilowatt hours is only 2% bigger than last year. So it's a significant change in efficiency. You'll now get 288 miles of range in the base trim, 278 miles of range in every other trim, including the model with 338 horsepower. They've also managed to keep weight in check. The curb weight for the base trim is 4,395 pounds, which is pretty similar to the Tesla Model Y, and efficiency actually manages to beat the Model Y according to the EPA. And that is despite the fact that we have 8.3 inches of ground clearance here. And that's one of the big reasons to get the Subaru over really any of the competition. Most EVs in this segment that this is competing with, whether we're talking about Ioniq 5 or EV6 or Mustang Mach-E, etc., they're really quite low to the ground. I've said this before, but the Mach-E has less ground clearance than an actual V8 Mustang. So it may look kind of SUV-like, but it certainly wouldn't be able to do the kinds of things that this can do, even if it had fantastic motors and traction control software, because it just won't be able to clear obstacles. And out here, as you're going to see in a moment, it's not just small rocks like this that you don't have to worry about, it's bigger obstacles as well. You may have noticed this at the beginning of the video, but we have a new charge door and a new charge port. It's over here on the passenger side, not on the driver's side, and it is the J3400 or NACS charge connector. There is going to be an adapter that comes with the vehicle, as well as a level 2 dual voltage charge cord, according to Subaru. Charge times are significantly improved over last year, from 100 kilowatts up to 150 kilowatts DC charging peak. 30 minutes from 10% to 80% is now the quoted time. But importantly, because most people are not DC fast charging all the time, the AC charging speed, which is the most important one for me, that has gone significantly up from 6.6 kilowatts, which was always kind of slow, up to 11 kilowatts, which is absolutely normal for the segment. And because of their efficiency drive, this will charge completely full from completely empty in about 7 hours. That's a really good time. Even if you roll in late at night running on the fumes of electrons, you can get a complete charge as long as you have time for a good night's sleep. The new Solterra is definitely better than the outgoing model, but it's certainly not bigger than the outgoing model. Dimensionally, the interior has stayed about the same, as has the design of the front seats. So even in this top-end trim, for instance, we have a power driver's seat with just 2-way adjustable lumbar support, not 4-way adjustable lumbar support. And we have a slightly more relaxed driving position than we find in a Forester. It's actually a little bit more like a Subaru Outback. That's just due to the roofline. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a reasonable range of motion, but still kind of an unusual driving position where you're looking across the top of the steering wheel at the instrument cluster, not through the steering wheel as you do in other vehicles. Now let's check out the back seat. Like the front seats, the rear seat position is a little bit more outback than Forester. I'm not talking about headroom, which is pretty decent back here. I have maybe about 1 inch of headroom left. I'm talking about how low the seat bottom cushion is. That you'll see right there. And that's one of the reasons that the legroom figure appears smaller than some of the competition, because it's this calculated measurement from where your feet are to your knee point. There's still a decent amount of room here, of course. I could easily put rear-facing child seats behind this front seat that was adjusted for a 6'5" passenger, or me as a driver here at 6 feet tall. You can see I have lots and lots of room for rear-facing child seats. It's also a pretty wide bench in the back. We do have a very minor hump in the middle, but it's nothing crazy there. And we have some improvements as well back here. Rear seat air vents. We have buttons for the heated seats now on this upper section of the center console, and 60-watt USB-C charge ports there. Speaking about child seats, we have latch anchors that are integrated into the seat back. No doors or flaps or anything like that. They're pretty easy to locate, and it is a relatively wide rear seat. So I suspect that this armrest would not interfere with even some of those larger child seats outboard. Shoulder belt, that comes out of the seat back, not out of the ceiling. That is definitely my preference. And the rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. This is my preferred 60-40, with the 40% side over here on the driver's side and the 60% over there, because then I can move that passenger seat as far forward as I can, and I can put bulkier items right in there from the cargo area. Speaking of the cargo area, let's check that out, because that is a key area where, again, this is a little bit more wagon-like than Subaru Forester-like, which is more boxy and upright. We don't find as much cargo room back here as you will find in a Forester or a Forester hybrid. And that's all due to this slope right here. You can see it's a pretty definite angle. You can line up 22-inch roller bags across the rear here pretty easily, and if I removed this roller cargo cover from the equation, I would be able to get 24-inch roller bags back here and still close the hatch. So it is a little bit more practical than the under 25 cubic feet of cargo area number would otherwise indicate. And I do like the fact that we have that roller style cover there. Now, if I take some of the luggage out, let's go under the floor, you'll notice we still don't have a spare tire, although I suspect there might be enough room to fit a temporary spare tire if you wanted to. I think that is still one misstep for the Solterra. I would love Subaru to be the one that brings us an inflatable or some other kind of temporary spare. In here we find the dual level charge connector, which is interestingly a J1772 connector with a Tesla adapter here. So adapters are definitely going to be the way of life for everybody in the future. It looks like this is what you're going to be using at home. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the XT trim, so this is the top end model. Up here we have controls for the big panoramic moonroof with that electric shade. We have slide out extensions on the fixed sun visors, so they don't slide out themselves, but they do swing to the side. Vanity mirrors there with lights for the driver and front passenger. We also have grip handles for all 4 outboard seating positions. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable head restraints for the driver and front passenger. And this particular trim has this really cool charcoal and navy blue two-tone interior. The seats are perforated and it has a fabric stripe there in the middle to help dress things up. We have surprisingly aggressive bolsters on the front seats for a mainstream EV, although the seat bottom cushion bolsters are not terribly aggressive, so I don't think taller or larger people would have too much trouble getting a good driving position here. Headroom is decent in the front, but you are going to find a bit more headroom in some of those EVs with the glass roof. Now, speaking of glass roof, we should go back up here and look at this, because this is a big panoramic moonroof, and it goes to just about the rear seat's chest area, I guess you'd say, if you're sitting back there, not quite to the head. So it doesn't really have an impact, or a positive impact, I should say, on headroom, but Subaru says that their customers prefer a completely opaque power shade, and I kind of have to agree with them on that, because having those big glass roofs, it really just can bake your head in strong sunlight. It has been 100 degrees in Denver while we were here. Now down over here on the doors, we have that two-tone color scheme continuing. Soft touch materials on the upper section of the door. This is kind of a very lightly coated hard plastic there. Hard plastics further forward. The soft touch material right there for the bulk of that insert in navy. Hard plastics lower down there on the door, like around that air vent. Looking at the upper section of the door, we have a hard plastic insert right there around that side view mirror and that auxiliary window. Kind of a rubbery coating on hard plastic for that very upper section where you might want to rest your elbow, but the armrest on the door, that's actually a soft touch material with that navy upholstery, very matching the seats there. We then have a Harman Kardon audio system in this particular model, hard plastics down there around the speaker grill and the bottle holders, and a definitely redesigned dashboard, but they did not give us a glove compartment. And that's because of this little panel here that may be difficult to see on camera. It is a fabric panel, and behind that fabric panel, we have a radiant heat grid. So this helps reduce the power consumption of the vehicle and also speeds up the heating or the feeling of heat in the vehicle on a cold winter day, because this will direct heat right there at your leg region, keeping your feet and your legs warm and reducing your power consumption, thereby extending your range. We have a soft touch insert here that again matches the upholstery in the vehicle, soft touch upper section, and then hard plastics on that upper tier of dashboard. This big touchscreen infotainment system is now standard. Last year we had a much smaller screen in the base model, so now we have the bigger screen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto compatibility standard in every trim. It does not occupy the entire screen, but you can expand it over to this side where it would block those shortcut buttons right over there. If this software looks familiar to you, well, it should, because this is the same software that we find in pretty much every modern Toyota, tweaked a little bit for Subaru, but not too much. We have the climate controls down here. These are physical knobs that ride on top of that touchscreen, but the rest of the climate controls, kind of un-Subaru-like, those are in that touchscreen unit there. Although we are going to see a similar change in the new Outback. Power button over there, the automated parking system, dual Qi wireless charging mats. I do like that feature right there. We have the same sort of rotary style shifter that we saw before, where we push down on this ring and then rotate it around for drive. Simply push down for neutral, push around for reverse, and park is that button up top. We have the drive mode selector over here and the X mode button. The X mode software was done by Subaru, although Toyota actually uses a variant of that in the BZ, which is interesting, but it was developed by Subaru. We have the 360-degree camera button over here, and if I go back up to the screen, you can see we have a bunch of different camera views there that are useful. You can also get a camera view of what you have run over. That's been digitally augmented by the system. So it basically just takes the camera footage there and then tweaks it to show you what you've just run over in the vehicle. Definitely handy for off-roading. but it is going to require that you're in motion. So if you have parked for a while, it's obviously not going to work because it hasn't done that data crunching. As far as storage goes, we are a little bit more limited here than in other EVs. We have a small storage area under there where I have my smartphone. Currently I'm connected to CarPlay via USB, but there is also wireless compatibility offered. We then have 2 cup holders here and this swing to the side storage bin here. That's basically it. This is your glove compartment. It will open from either side and it is softly padded. On the driver's side, we have basically the same squircle steering wheel that we had before and a very similar placement for the instrument cluster, but a slightly more attractive surround for everything here. The instrument cluster software, that's basically the same. The display is a little on the small side. It's not going to have any moving map displays or anything like that, but it is going to give you the basic info. Not everybody is a fan of its placement, however. Here's what it's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be sort of an in-between between an instrument cluster and head-up display while reducing cost. So you are supposed to drive the car like this, where you're looking at that instrument cluster over the top of the steering wheel. But depending on your size, you may not be able to get the steering wheel down low enough and far enough away to actually still see that instrument cluster. I have heard that complaint from shorter people. At my height, it's absolutely not a problem, but if you're a shorter person, that's something to keep in mind and one reason to look at the competition, or maybe a Forester. Over here we have controls for the adaptive cruise control system. This is not Subaru's regular eyesight system. This is a radar-based system. Over here we have controls for that multifunction LCD cluster, volume toggle, and voice command button. It wouldn't be a Subaru program if they didn't have a mild off-road course for us to check out, because that is, again, the mission of the Solterra. But as we get this out on this trail, keep in mind, A, it's not the most complicated trail, and B, we are talking about a vehicle with open differentials, so no lockers, front or rear. However, a lot of what makes an EV good off-road, like this or like a Rivian, to be honest, is actually the software. So let's check that out. In any vehicle, not just an EV, that doesn't have a locking differential, what gives you the ability to send power left and right across an axle is the brakes in the system. But not every manufacturer does this the same way, because some manufacturers will simply choose to cut power before they decide to try torque vectoring using those brakes. The brakes, of course, are not just responsible for sending power left and right, they're responsible for doing things like hill descent control, which we're using now, but honestly, I probably didn't really need to, because the anti-lock brakes work pretty well. This hill descent control system is a little bit louder than some. You could probably hear the anti-lock brakes doing their thing. This is not quite as quiet as some of the newer Toyota hill descent control systems that I've heard out there. The anti-lock brake system is just a little bit louder, but it does the job just fine. The more important thing for a vehicle like the Solterra is to not have a punishing ride and have enough ground clearance that if you're out on a trail like this that's not exactly the best maintained, you don't feel like you're in a situation where you're going to get stuck. And that's what this does really well. 8.3 inches of ground clearance, again, is the big thing here, whether you're worried about snow or, you know, surfaces like this. You live out in the country, maybe you go hiking and you just want to go further down that trailhead on that BLM property. This is going to be just fine. Just don't expect it to do Moab or any kind of rock crawling like that. On these obstacles that they have for us up here, you do get off camber a little bit, but see what I mean in just a moment. For most folks, ground clearance is going to be the biggest reason to get the Solterra, not because you plan on taking this to Moab, but because if you want to go on a rougher trail like the one that we're on here, it's going to be a lot easier to keep your car safe and not damaged if you have enough ground clearance to go over the obstacles and not get hung up on them. And this would be trickier even in something like a Mustang Mach-E Rally, which is, as they imply, more rally style focused, not exactly off-roady focused. It's not designed to be a Bronco. But as we move over to these moguls, and I will deliberately go over them slowly so you can see what's going on, in a system like this, it really does depend on the brake-based traction control system to send power around. So if I get stopped there, press a little bit, it's got to figure it out. You'll see it going. Again, next mogul, wheel up in the air in the back. System has to use the brakes, gets the job done, no problem. And it feels very confident because it's not trying to limit engine power, well, motor power in this situation. Before we get this out on the paved road, the last thing I should mention is the suspension tuning. It has changed this year. They've actually made the front springs a little bit stiffer and the rear springs a little bit softer. So they didn't change the character of the Solterra, which means it's still relatively comfortable on a trail like this. These are not the highest profile tires out there, but they're not exactly low profile tires either. These are 50 series tires if I remember correctly. You will get a little bit more cushion in the base model, but the ride quality I think is still perfectly acceptable to spend 30-45 minutes, maybe an hour on a trail like this if you, again, want to go out to that national park. Absolutely not a problem. Before we get this out on the paved road, the last thing I should mention is the suspension tuning. It has changed this year. They've actually made the front springs a little bit stiffer and the rear springs a little bit softer. So they didn't change the character of the Solterra, which means it's still relatively comfortable on a trail like this. These are not the highest profile tires out there, but they're not exactly low profile tires either. These are 50 series tires if I remember correctly. You will get a little bit more cushion in the base model, but the ride quality I think is still perfectly acceptable to spend 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour on a trail like this if you, again, want to go out to that national park. Absolutely not a problem. All right, let's get this out on the road. Keep in mind, we are driving the XT, which is the 338 horsepower model, and this one went 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. And there are two of us, and we have luggage in the vehicle. I guess you could say we are also at 9,000 feet approximately, but that doesn't matter to an electric vehicle. The air is ever so slightly less dense up here, but not enough to actually make a difference when it comes to the 60 to 0 or 0 to 60 scores. And in case you're wondering, that stopping distance was 119 feet, which is a pretty good showing for a mainstream vehicle that's not trying to be a sporty EV. It's all thanks to the light curb weight in the Solterra. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, you know, hey, 4,400 pounds approximately is not light, but if you have checked out a Chevy Blazer, for instance, you will understand that this is actually a relatively lightweight vehicle. And there are even some gasoline vehicles out there that are going to be in this same curb weight range. Obviously not something like a Subaru Forester, that's on the lighter side of its segment, but a Forester hybrid, yeah, it's lighter, but it's not going to be that much lighter than this. And the curb weight is also nice and low in the vehicle, giving this that nice low center of gravity. The decision to put the bigger electric motor, or the more powerful electric motor I should say, up front is an interesting one, because if we slow down and then we floor it around corners like this, you will feel some tugging, some torque steer that you don't feel, for instance, in an EV6 or an Ioniq 5, because they have a significantly more powerful motor in the back. But for daily driving, and especially for inclement weather driving, putting the more powerful motor up front kind of makes sense. Also, it makes sense engineering-wise, because the inverter module up front is the bigger one. It has the direct connection to the battery there. That's where the charger is, the DC charging, all that electrical infrastructure is happening up front. So you might as well stick the more powerful motor and all of that in that front area. The back electric motor, it's more powerful than the one last year. And also remember that if you are in a sticky situation where you need that extra torque in the back and that extra traction, this can actually send power 50-50 front and rear up till about, 230 horsepower or something like that. So it's not a major limitation. Also, depending on how you're driving this, if we put this in the sportier modes and you're on a narrow road going relatively low speeds and you put a little bit more power into it, it can actually bias power a little bit towards the rear. It's not going to turn this into a Mustang or anything like that, but unless you're flooring it, it's going to try and balance power a little bit more equitably front and rear. That torque steer feel is really only going to happen in straight line acceleration when you're punching it and you're demanding all 338 horsepower. Let's talk preliminary scores now. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give this a B. This has a lower center of gravity than a Forester, but clearly higher than an EV6 or an Ioniq 5 or something along those lines. But I think that's an okay trade-off because the ride quality is fantastic. That's aided, in addition to just the design and the amount of ground clearance that we have here, by the light curb weight. There's less mass to damp, so we don't need springs that are as firm. We have greater suspension travel than we find in the competition as well. And all that means that this is more daily driver livable, in addition to being more soft road or mild off-road capable. If, like me, going home means turning onto a gravel road like this is going to be a lot more comfortable than the average EV that, again, really was trying to chase Tesla down that really firm and bouncy rabbit hole. This is daily driver comfortable, whether you're driving on roads like this or freeways with large expansion joints. It's just a comfortable place to be. It also is quieter than the last generation Solterra. They spent a lot of time improving the sound deadening all around the vehicle, and I noticed that immediately on gravel roads like this, where previously you would hear gravel being thrown up into the wheel wells. Here, you don't get that anymore. We haven't been able to do any sound level testing here, but I suspect this is going to be around the 62, maybe 63 decibel mark when we get it at home, so relatively comparable to most EVs. And the previous one was a little bit louder, especially on road surfaces like this. Efficiency has also greatly improved. Although my trip average there is showing 2.4 miles per kilowatt hour, keep in mind we went from Denver up to 9,500 feet, been 0 to 60 and 6 to 0 testing it. It's also been parked while we filmed, keeping the air conditioning on, since it has been a little bit toasty out here. But before we were doing all that, we were averaging 3.3 to 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour, depending on the road surface and the speeds that we were going, etc. 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour would actually put this closer to the base model in terms of range. I wouldn't be surprised if we got this at home and we actually slightly beat the EPA estimate on this. But again, what's most impressive about that efficiency number is that Subaru is getting there with 20% more ground clearance than average in this segment. A lot of people get lost in coefficient of drag. Remember, it's a coefficient, it's not a fixed number. This exact same vehicle, if it was 20% closer to the ground, would be more efficient. But Subaru really wanted this to be able to do the things that you can do in a Forester. They're not trying to target Wrangler shoppers, obviously, but they want the average Subaru customer to say, I'd be able to choose electric and not give up the things that I like to be able to do in my Subaru. That's exactly what we see here. And if you were to look at anything more efficient than this, especially for real-world daily driver efficiency, yeah, you might find it in some of the options, most notably that Model Y. It really does perform well in the real world. It's not going to be able to go down the kinds of trails that this can, simply because of that ground clearance. So bottom line, out on the road at the moment, the Subaru really stands alone, or well, along with that new BZ, because if you do prefer a Toyota dealer experience or a Toyota logo, you can get very much this same experience in that BZ for 2026 as well. To say that the EV space has changed in 2025 is putting it mildly, but oddly enough, the loss of the federal tax credit puts the Solterra on more even footing, especially against Tesla and General Motors offerings, because this is built in Japan, not in North America. Although it is going to incur a tariff on import, it probably has less of an impact than that tax credit did on the competition. Now, I don't know the pricing of this Solterra yet, but I probably will by the time this video goes live, so you'll probably see pricing on the side of your screen. But they have said it's going to stick really, really close to 2025. In fact, base model to base model, they're suggesting the price difference will be under $100. And for 2025, it starts at $39,915, including the destination charge. That definitely makes this significantly less expensive than a Rivian R1S or an R1T. Even something like the Jeep Wagoneer S, it's not as off-road capable. It has significantly less ground clearance than I had expected it to have. So if you want an EV with this kind of ground clearance, you're really looking mainly at luxury segment vehicles outside of some of those much more expensive and obviously more capable off-road vehicles. This is not an R1S competitor. It's not as big, it's not as powerful, it's not as off-road capable, but it does exactly what a Subaru Forester can do, only it's electric. And it's finally something that I can recommend, because even though it doesn't have that magical supposed 300 miles of range that everybody wants, I think 288 miles of range with 150 kilowatt DC fast charging is fast enough. In 30 minutes, you'll go from 10% to 80%. That's pretty average for a lot of EVs out there. And because of their efficiency drive, you'll now get a reasonable amount of actual driving range. That was not the case in the previous Solterra. The range, though, it is still below some of the competitors. On the other hand, we now have more power to help justify that and the extra ground clearance. And that's something that I think a lot of people discount with the Solterra on the range. The ground clearance is a huge factor when it comes to aerodynamics, because having a vehicle high off the ground like this makes 300 miles of range really, really tricky. Just check out the Rivian, how big the battery pack has to be in a Hummer, a Rivian, a Ford Lightning, etc. And that's where the efficiency of the Solterra, I think, actually is quite impressive. And that's part of why they redesigned the front end, redesigned the underbody, of course, redesigned the battery pack. All of that has been tweaked to try and make this what Subaru customers are interested in. And I would say it's finally on my recommended list. If you want to be able to go to the back of Beyond, and you already live in the front of Beyond, mind you, because 288 miles of range means you could come to a place like this and go on an off-road trail, go camping. If you live in Denver, absolutely no problem. If you live in the Bay Area, you could go up to Tahoe, absolutely no problem. But if you do live in a more remote area, that could be tricky. However, that sort of circle of areas where you could live in and go to somewhere fun and do some off-roading in your Subaru, it has been greatly expanded for 2026. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And what do you think about this versus, of course, the very closely related Toyota BZ? I think this still looks better, even though that BZ has, of course, had a makeover and a new look as well. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section. And would you get this, or would you get a hybrid Forester? I have to admit, the hybrid Forester is pretty tasty, and the big difference between this and that hybrid Forester is going to be in the cargo area. It's not going to have this dramatic angle in the back, and therefore it is going to have a significantly more practical cargo area. There has to be a trade-off somewhere, and that's really the main one: Solterra versus Forester. See all of you later.